So Nick, I've been really excited to do this. I have a weird first question for you.
Yeah.
Um, so I saw you tweet that one of the topics you can talk about unprepared is what Taylor Swift teaches us about SaaS. And so I sort of want to test you on that. But what are one or two things that you think SaaS founders can learn from Taylor Swift?
Well, I think the number one thing is that, in SaaS, it's all about connecting with the community. And, you can tell that the Swifties out there, including me, you can see my hoodie, feel this connection to Taylor, even though 99.99% of us will never beat her, right? And I think that's a lot like in SaaS, where you built this community of SaaS entrepreneurs and founders, right? And you have this connection amongst all of them, and they feel like they're all kind of part of one thing, even though many of them will never meet each other, right? And the same kind of thing is true, I think, with any great fan base like Taylor or anyone else, is you feel like you're this kind of all together, even if you're virtual or you're in many different cities, or you just see her from 1,000 feet away in a tour in Eras tour in Tokyo or something, right? So that's the first thing I think we can all learn. The second thing I think is the incredible power that comes from passion. And just, you can tell she puts her heart and soul into everything she does. And I think that many founders, that's what you do. You put your life, your heart and soul into everything, right? It's just amazing. And then maybe the third lesson, the final one, is sometimes you just have to shake it off, right? That's one of her famous songs. And, in SaaS and business in general, right? Like, tough things happen, and during the course of a day, you might have one meeting where a customer tells you they're leaving, they're churning. And the next meeting might be a new customer that's coming on board. The next meeting might be an employee that tells you they're moving on from your company. And the next meeting is about interviewing a new candidate, right? You meet an investor that passes on your investment, and then the next one is excited to invest. And you have to every single time bounce back right away and just remember, like, every single meeting, just be super present and be there. So those are some things. I could write a whole book about this, but those are three off the top.
That's awesome. A few to follow up on that. You said, showing passion to everything you do. I'm curious, so like, what are some great ways to sort of show that you're passionate about something, or like actually showing the customers that you're passionate about it? Like, is there any way to, especially if you want to like sort of scale that across a
Yeah.
lot of customers?
Yeah, totally. And
Mm.
also your team, you want to scale across them. I
Yeah.
think there's a few different things to do. Number one
Mm.
is describe, why does the passion matter for your customers? And I think part of that is, if you're in SaaS, you're not building something and you're done building it. You're building a stream of innovation, right? And a customer wants to invest in a company that's going to be innovating and always be at the forefront. And that comes from passion. I'm irrationally passionate, not just about Taylor Swift, but about customer success. And if somebody wants to have a partner, a vendor who is going to be a partner and innovating customer success, they want to work with a company that's passionate about it, right? And so I think part of it is really like, why does the passion matter? It matters because that's part of why people choose you. But
Mm.
then in terms of how to make it happen, a few thoughts. Well, number one is, I think, really bringing your personality to what you do, right? So we started with this Taylor Swift thing, which is real. I'm a huge Swiftie, and everyone knows it. And so therefore I write LinkedIn posts, and I put a Taylor Swift quote in the top, right? And it shows
Yeah.
that it's not just some like corporate, somebody wrote it for me. This is me. Well, I'm excited myself, right? And the enthusiasm becomes very evident. So that's
Mm.
number one. Number two is, I think you can find different types of media to show that. So LinkedIn post, the way you write an email, putting your personality, obviously making videos, not just videos or LinkedIn posts by the company, but even if you're a salesperson, right? There's a lot you can do to bring your personality in that every day. It could even be just the way you open your Zoom meeting,
Mm.
How do you start that Zoom meeting? And maybe we start all of our meetings with an icebreaker question, like literally a customer meeting. Hey, let's talk about your favorite concert you've ever been to, or when you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up, right? And bring that energy and passion.
Mm.
And then the last thing is, I think when you think about your team and scaling it, it's giving them permission to do all of this as well. Celebrating them. I'll give you an example.
Mm.
There's a CSM at Gainsight named Nate Bartlett. I've told this story a few times.
Mm.
Nate has been at Gainsight, I think, probably 2-3 years now. And I was on an executive business review with a client. So it was me and Nate, and then 2 executives from the client, just the 4 of us. And Nate said, let's start with an icebreaker. What's your favorite concert you've ever been to? And so everyone went around, of course, talked about Taylor Swift Eras Tour. Other people talked about other concerts. And then afterwards, Nate made a Spotify playlist of the songs from those concerts and sent it around. Right. And then what happened? Well, I celebrated Nate on Slack and said, hey, Nate, great job. And now I'm talking about him here. And so if you can celebrate people in your company who are bringing that passion and give them the permission, not just the permission, but the endorsement to bring that passion, that goes a long way.
That's amazing. That example with Nate, like it's amazing follow up, and it leaves an impression, and no one's gonna forget that, right? So
Totally.
yeah, and I can also see on your Zoom that you have Nick Metaphysical Meta, right? So I can see that you're bringing those elements in almost every aspect.
Try to bring that fun to enjoy to everything, because people really are inspired by people that are excited. You know, like I said, I think a lot of people are like, I don't know what customer success is, but Nick seems excited about it, so I should probably know what it is, right? Same kind of thing, you know, so.
Makes sense. Awesome. I like to spend a good chunk of time about finding Act Two. It's been a hot topic actually for a lot of SaaS founders, especially just, you know, considering the competitive dynamics and all these companies entering the market and with Gen AI and all these things. So everyone's thinking what to do next, right? And we'd love to learn from your experience. And so one thing I remember you mentioning at a talk that you saw a slowdown in Gainsight's growth at around $50 million in ARR. I'm curious sort of what you saw back then, and what did you do to sort of re-accelerate your growth?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you what I did, and which basically what I wish I'd done is do what I did sooner. So the reason our growth slowed down is actually, I think where a lot of growth slows down in SaaS, I think there are fundamentally 2 reasons growth slowed down in SaaS, right? One is that you're in a giant market, but it's hyper competitive, and it's been, you know, it's hard to, you know, for anyone to get much market share. There's some categories like a lot of marketing technology is like that. Marketing technology is a big market, but there are a lot of competitors. And then sometimes it's more of a niche category where there's not as big of a market, but you can be very dominant, but you eventually run out of space. And so for us, it was the latter. The Gainsight's early Act One was selling software to customer success teams in SaaS companies, right? And as you know, SaaS is a big space, but it's just one of many industries in the world, right? And CSM as an idea was pretty nascent when we slowed down. It was still a new concept. And so, yeah, we slowed down because we didn't have much addressable market that hadn't already bought Gainsight. We were far and away the leader in our space, but just the space wasn't big enough. So this happens a lot. Either way, either you're in a competitive markets that's big, but you can't get much traction, or you're in a small market where you're the leader, but you get run out of space. I think either way, this Act Two concept is important because it helps you figure out either how you're going to differentiate in that big market, like the first example, or for our case, how you're going to use these new things to get into other markets or expand your footprint and so on, right? And it's super important to do that. It's important to do that early. I did it too late. Not too late, like we recovered, but I wish I did it way sooner. In fact, every single thing, a lot of things I think entrepreneurs, you know, you look in hindsight, you're like, I wish we'd done it sooner. And I think in general, realizing that either your market's getting to a limit or it's too competitive, and I need to go do more things and new things. It could be I need to reinvent my core business. That could be Act Two, reinvent with generative AI. Or it could be like, I need to get into adjacencies, meaning other things, you know, maybe other things our functional buyer buys. So in our case, what else does the chief customer officer in a company buy besides customer success software? In our case, we got into customer training software, customer community software. These all very much fit into that. Or it could be things that your functional buyer doesn't buy, but the same company buys. So we got to like product analytics, not sold to the chief customer officer, sold typically to the chief product officer, but nonetheless the same company, right? Or it could be something that gets you into different industries, you know? And so the key thing is recognizing early when your business is slowing down, having that pipeline of ideas, you know, could be things you're incubating internally, could be potential acquisitions, and executing on that soon enough so that when your business actually slows down, you have something else to kind of speed it back up.
And in your case, like, were you the one that sort of spearheaded that second act, or the second,
It was, I think as a CEO, you have to. I mean, I would say it's me and at the time, so we got into this, the beginning of our second act was like 4 or 5 years ago when we bought this company that got us into the product analytics space. And Allison Pickens was our COO at the Chief Operating Officer at the time. She's an investor now, so she's not in Gainsight, but still a very good friend. And she was the one who actually said we need to expand through some new products, and in that case, an acquisition. And so, yeah, she drove part of that. But yeah, as a CEO, you have to be really passionate about that. In fact, I would say that as a CEO, you have to always be thinking about what's the problem that's further down the road. And in some ways, one of the mistakes I've made is not having a team sometimes that can be solving the problems of today. So I'm stuck solving the problems of today instead of solving the problems of tomorrow, right? Brian Halligan was the founder and CEO of HubSpot, not CEO anymore, and he has a great expression, which I love. He says the CEO's job is to be the chief pothole spotter. So pothole, like the holes in the road.
Yeah.
And if you drive over a pothole, your car is going to hit a bump and maybe a car gets damaged. So you're supposed to be looking down the road, far down the road for that pothole. So somebody else is driving the car and you're looking for the pothole. And I think this is an example where there was a pothole of our business slowing down. And I saw it. I wish I'd seen it sooner, but I saw it.
And if you were to advise founders, like at what scale, like is it $10 million in ARR or $3 million in ARR, you should be thinking about your second act?
It's really, it's funny because it just comes down to how big your initial first act market is, right?
Yeah.
So there's certain markets that are gigantic. You had Frank Slootman in this community before, right? And they're in the data, or his old business because he left now, but Snowflake's in the data warehousing market. And that's just a gigantic market, right? And so therefore, you certainly have to figure out the act two, but you don't have to do it right away. There's some businesses that got to billions and billions of dollars of revenue without an act two. Microsoft Windows, right? Amazon e-commerce, things like that. But I think that more common, most likely, if you're watching this, you're not running an Amazon or Microsoft. You're running a mere mortal company like Gainsight. And if that's true, I found that a lot of SaaS companies slow down somewhere between 20 and 100 million of ARR, 100 if it's a bigger market, 20 if it's smaller. And so what I would say is, what are the signs of it slowing down? And so one way to think about that is the annual recurring revenue, the total annual recurring revenue, is a bit of a misleading indicator because your business could be growing in annual recurring revenue, but not growing in bookings, meaning new logo acquisition. And so if your new logo acquisition stops growing and starts flattening out, you know that your business is going to start flattening out within a few years. And so that's an example. But even further upstream, if the lead volume in your business starts flattening out, so if it was growing like this and now it's flat, that's a sign you probably need to go to act two. So I think the key thing for advising people is have those early warning indicators that tell you, trouble's coming, the pothole's coming. I've got to figure out, how to redirect this car so we can keep driving, and don't do it when it's too late.
That's amazing practical advice. And that's probably something I'll look out for whenever I look at advise companies as well. So new logos generated.
Correct.
Okay.
Logos generated, so important. Yeah.
Awesome. And you mentioned, another follow-up question on that. So, Jason Lemkin mentioned that your act two has to be bigger or at least as big as your first act. I mean, do you believe in that statement? And if so, how do you know if your second act is good enough or big enough?
It's a really good question. I think that, so I agree with the statement, because otherwise the math, your business won't be able to keep growing, because if your act one is this big and your act two is this big, then it won't really get you that far, right? So I think, as always, Jason's right. But I would say that what might happen in your act two is it could be a string of little acts. So in our case, our core product, the Gainsight customer success product, it has a very high average selling price and, very well regarded, for our customers, it's a core mission critical system. And then some of these other products are smaller in price. And so when you add them all up, it's significant, but as individuals, it's not that big. And so you may need to do a bunch of smaller things to be able to equal the size of your first act.
Interesting. So your second act doesn't have to be a single product, but it could be a string of products or a set of products.
Could be a suite of products. They have to fit together. Like in our case, what happened was our customer success product is primarily used by our clients' teams. The other products we have are used by our clients' clients. So in other words, when one of our clients wants their client to get trained, they use our education product. So the user of our education product is our client's client. And so what that allowed us to do is say, what are all the things our clients use? They take training, they active in a community, they use the product. And so we could kind of say, okay, what do we need to do to assemble this full experience?
Interesting. And you mentioned at a different talk that you should have a database of your addressable market, and you should be tracking that. I'd love to sort of understand more, like what's inside this database and like what you should be exactly tracking. And I have a follow-up question on sort of similar, but like at what percentage of market share do you start to worry about saturation or slowdown of, on this database? Yeah.
You're asking some really good practical questions. So the database itself, the idea here was, when companies present to an investor, often they'll say here's our total addressable market, and it'll be some huge number, like, $10 billion or something to that effect, right?
Yeah.
And that's fine if you're trying to get the investor to invest, whatever, that's fine. But don't kid yourself. You have an actual market of who's going to buy now. Some people call it the SOM, serviceable something market.
Yeah.
And I should know what that is. And it's basically like, who's going to buy now, and then also who's going to buy over time, right? And so what I would do is I would say, okay, let's build a list of all the companies that we think could buy. Let's look at which ones are actually going to buy in the next 3 years and who is going to buy this year. Now, how do you do that? Well, you can start scoring. Like in our case, it could be like, how many CSMs do they have? Well, and also our typical client, how many CSMs they have? Well, okay, well, if our typical client has five CSMs or 10, then let's look at all companies that have more than 10 CSMs. And that's probably a more ideal profile of like our target. Now, let's assume I'm going to get 20% of them. We'll come back to like how do you know when you're running out? And what I would do is not only I'd build that database, first of all, that field in our case of number of CSMs, that doesn't exist in some public database. What do we do? At Gainsight, we take a list of all the, in our case, tech companies, and we append it with, literally looking up on LinkedIn, how many CSMs do they have? We put it in our database, right? And that allows us to like score our target market. We add all kinds of other fields and filters. So, things like, let's say, do they have a cloud product? Are they public? Are they private equity backed? And then we score those, kind of rank those in terms of propensity to buy. And then we'll use the previous year to look at like what should be in those models, kind of like data science, right? What bought last year, what would lead us to believe they'll buy this year? And so that's the operations around it. But I would go further and say, who are the people? And so in our case, I want a list of every single CSM in the world, every VP of CS, every CCO. And I want to like build that, from LinkedIn or whatever. And then I can actually track where they're going and I can market to them. And so I would really, if you're an early stage entrepreneur, I would invest in this, like almost like it's a product. And then on your second question of how do you know when it's getting saturated? I think you'll learn what's that like top graded accounts, meaning the highest propensity to buy, right? And in a given, first of all, like you could look at how many new top graded accounts are being added every year, right? So let's say you have 1,000 top graded accounts and 1 year you close 100 of them. And then the next year you update the database because there's new companies and there's another 100 top graded accounts. Well, that's good. You could probably close another 100, maybe another 150. But let's say you only added 50 next year. Like in other words, there are only 50 new. You'll start seeing, where our penetration rate is going to start flattening out. And so I would notice the number of high quality accounts, like your top graded, that are being added to the database each year. That's what I would monitor very tangibly.
Interesting. That's super practical, but also super sophisticated. It's amazing. Yeah.
It is. But the great thing is if you're small and early stage, which I think some folks watching, you can do this because like the number of accounts you have, the number of data, it's hard. It's not that big. When you're, we're, a bigger company, not a huge, a couple $100 million of revenue. It's a lot of work to build that.
Yeah.
And we can do it, and we've done some of it. But if I were doing it from scratch, I would spend a lot of time up front. And then you can, by the way, then you can report to people about who are our targets and
Yeah.
who owns our product and what's the upside, and everything else is easier than.
Very specific question around that. Like, what do you use to build that? Is it proprietary, like you build it in-house, or?
Oh no, I wish. It's literally I have an incredible revenue operations team, and
Yeah.
they append some fields to Salesforce, but then they do a lot of the work in Tableau and stuff like that. So yeah, all custom. They're really it's funny because I always felt like there should be a software company around this. Maybe there is, but I just haven't heard about it. But we don't use anything today.
Awesome. And I have another specific question around Gainsight. You mentioned that you focus on sort of B2B and tech companies initially, right? As your sort of initial customer profile. And we realize on your website that you're also looking into healthcare, right? As a target segment. I'm curious, out of all these sort of adjacent segments that you could have expanded to, like, why did you pick healthcare, and like what was sort of the thought process behind that?
Yeah, I think that it's more that probably will happen for a lot of companies, or maybe has as well, as you focus on one market, and then other things kind of come in organically, right? So I was actually just talking to somebody who was at Slack a long time ago, and she was like, they sold high-tech companies, and then media companies started using them, and then things like that. So in our case, healthcare companies started buying Gainsight, and just a few, but we were like, oh, there's more here. And then we ran an experiment to say, can we expand that? And so I would say, notice if you go back to your total addressable market, it's all the companies that are in your initial vertical, but then also those outliers in other verticals. And then what can you do to turn those outliers into whole new markets? So that's kind of where healthcare came from.
Interesting. So you sort of got pulled into that market.
Pulled into and it's probably, by the way, under the covers, probably something like one of your champions at one of your clients in your first vertical, like in our case, high tech, goes to a job at a company, a healthcare company.
Interesting.
And says, oh, you should check this company out called Gainsight, right? And then they bring you in, and the people there probably never heard of Gainsight, but then they bring it in, you have some success, and then you can use that to kind of make it more repeatable.
Interesting. And another question, this is very specific again, but some issues or some situations that we run into with our companies is that they go into an adjacent market, but then there's a whole set of functions or features that's only like sort of requested by this adjacent market, and not your entire sort of user base. Like in that case, like how would you make a decision whether or not you accept that feature request or that roadmap?
Yeah, I think part of it is I think there's two different things. One is you want to prioritize your adjacent markets based on the size of the market and then the proximity to what you already do well, right? So there might be a market that's very, very, an adjacency that's very big, right? Let's say something like financial services, right? And it requires a lot of product work, and that's probably fine. Or there's an adjacency like maybe a smaller market like media, but it requires not much product work. And the thing you have to watch out for is don't find an adjacent market that's small and requires a lot of product work. That's what you don't want to do. Yeah.
Interesting. So it's that 4x4.
4x4, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Well, I think there's a lot that we can learn from this segment of the Finding Second Act. And I already learned a lot already. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So the other chunk of questions that I have is around leadership, and I love the slide that you showed. I think it was like a talk at SaaStr last year, where you have sort of the 5 values and like exactly what you expect from everyone. How do you enforce this, and how do you hold everyone accountable to sort of abide by this? And especially when you have multiple layers of leadership and management.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different pieces to the puzzle, and I'd say it's one of the most common questions. How do you drive alignment to your values across the company? A few tactics. I think one is, as a leader, you can lead by example a lot, right? Like I send an email to the company every Sunday night, every single week for years and years and years. I guess I've 50 weeks a year for 11 years, right? So 500 emails or something. Yeah. And every time it says the first section is value of the week, and something I thought people did well for one of our I'll pick a value each time and talk about something people did well. this past week, our value of the week was golden rule. That value means treat people the way you'd want to be treated. And I talk about, how people have been supporting each other recently through some hard things. Different people have, health things or family issues, and just how I love seeing that. And that's part of our culture, right? So, as a leader, your own choice to be transparent and open, also like vulnerable about yourself and what you've gone through, that goes a long way. So that's one thing. Inside that is also openness to like you or yourself improving and growing. So I'll give you an example there where I think it's amazing when you're fortunate enough as a CEO to have a teammate be able to give you constructive feedback, and not just like one of the executives. So there was a person named Julia at Gainsight a long time ago, 7-8 years ago. And we were in one of our first offices, and we'd have, this is back when we were in person offices, and we'd have meetings around this big conference table, and, we'd have lunch brought in or whatever. And Julia, I sent out a survey, I think, employee survey, and said, hey, we'd love to get feedback. It was a small company back then, so, not much feedback, but Julia gave me feedback. She said, I wish Nick would stop leaving his trash on the table and clean it up instead. And I love that she said that. And what I did? I took that and I shared that with the company. I was like, yeah, I was leaving my trash on the table. Very small thing, but it's two things. Number one, I need to get better. But number two, it's great to show that so that people see, oh, Nick's open to feedback too, right? And so I think that a lot that a leader can do to model. But then the next level is holding your team accountable. So that's what you were alluding to, right?
Yep.
And I think there's multiple pieces to the puzzle. There's getting comfortable being candid, which it's been a development process for me, but it's basically finding a way to channel your own candor to say, hi, like, if I'm talking to one of my executives, you haven't actually, as part of one of our values, we talk about being responsive to people in email. And I slacked one of my executives and I said, I just want to be candid. You haven't been very responsive lately. We say respond to everything in 24 hours. And this person wasn't, but then she owned up to the feedback right away and started doing it. So that's an example where it's like just bringing the candor. But then I think maybe one of the bigger ones for us as a leadership team is when you're hiring people, when we're hiring people, we give them this document of expectations before they take the job. And so we don't, like, in general, I'm not a believer of trying to convince somebody to take a job. Instead, for me, I say, this is who we are. This is the good about Gainsight. This is the bad. If you love it and you're excited, please join us. If you don't worry. So I'm actually interviewing I hired somebody senior recently, and I was interviewing different candidates, and I never sold them on Gainsight. I told them everything, including the challenges. I said, here's all the problems. But I'm hiring you because you can help us fix them. If you're not excited about fixing them, here's my expectations. Here's what you'll hear about me, things like that. I tell candidates, due diligence on me. Talk to my references too, don't. So I think that's another thing you can do is really set expectations while coming in.
Interesting. Yeah. So that candidness, and I guess that transparency that you're,
Totally.
receiving feedback and actually acting on it, I guess is a great way to show example, and people will follow that.
Right. Yeah.
And I understand that you also do 360 reviews on yourself periodically.
Right.
And I'm just curious, sort of, what were some of the more helpful feedbacks that sort of shaped your current leadership style?
Yeah. And so I've done 360s. I'm sure I've done over 11 years, probably at least 7 or 8 of them. And early on, they were less formal. So I might have a board member do one or like do a survey. And now I use a professional third party who did my 360. It wasn't very expensive, but somebody who would call each member of the management team and each member of the board and, ask, what does Nick do well? What can Nick improve at? Some basic questions. The biggest thing that came out for me this time was an evolution in how I spend my own personal time at work. So in the early days of Gainsight, you can imagine when you're an entrepreneur early on, you're having every single thing you're trying to do yourself, get, that customer, that sale, that onboarding, that product issue. So my calendar was very fragmented with lots and lots of little meetings, and it's still pretty busy. But the feedback was, Nick, it's time to spend more time on strategy and on going deep versus going too broad. And I started cutting back on some of the external meetings and other things. I still meet a lot of customers, but I cut back on some other things and allowed myself to go deeper and like setting time on strategy and like whole blocks, half day blocks, etc. And it's for my style, for me, I like to work in a group. So it's not like I just sit there on my own and work on strategy. I'm just not that kind of person, but I pick a couple people and we go off in a whiteboard and we work for half a day or a day. And so that was one piece of feedback that was very, very actionable, and I really appreciate it. Now, on the flip side, I would say if you ever do a 360, a key thing to think about is you get all the feedback, but don't act on all. So I got lots of other feedback, I'm sure. Some lots positive, some constructive. I didn't do all of it because some of it isn't me or it's not who I am. So an example of that was a long time ago, previous company, 15 years ago. And I'm running this company and I get a 360 and it was mostly positive, but the one of the investors said, I'd love to see Nick act with more gravitas. And in case folks don't know, gravitas means like more formality and serious. And it's interesting because I got that feedback and I was like, I had to Google what gravitas meant. And then I was like, that's just not me. In fact, if I tried to do that and not be the silly Taylor Swift, high energy person that I am, you would lose like who I am. So I would say solicit feedback, listen to all of it, find the things to act on, don't lose who you are in the process.
That's a big takeaway, I feel like, because whenever you do 360s or get feedback for everyone, you feel like you have to act on everyone because you don't want to let anyone down. But yeah, not forgetting who you are and what's you, and actually picking the right, picking and choosing the feedback, right? So I guess that's a huge takeaway, I feel.
Love that.
Yeah. And there's a quote that I heard you mention somewhere that, I thought I should hire for the role 4 years from now, but in reality, I needed to bet on the person who believed in Gainsight for the last 4 years.
Right.
And as the organization gets larger, I would guess it gets harder to identify who to bet on. And I'm just curious if you had any ways as a leader to sort of identify the people you should be betting on, like maybe it's a mechanism or some sort of framework or the way you keep in touch with everyone. But curious how you manage that.
Yeah, I think this is a harder one to have a formal framework on, but I think there's a few things that maybe have worked for us if I think of like examples that have worked. So my chief of staff, Robin, she started as my chief of staff, and she's my chief people officer now. And so she started as an individual contributor, and she was prior to Gainsight, she was at Box and did internal communications, and she was a recruiter. And she's just one of the best people I've ever worked with in my life by far. And so there was our previous chief people officer was incredible too, named Carol. She ended up stepping down, and Robin basically was the not this experienced chief people officer person. But what I saw was she had this incredible EQ, emotional quotient. She knew how to understand people, but she also had very high IQ of like really understanding business and everything else. She was very organized. She got a lot of stuff done. She's a great leader. And so I said, okay, let's make a bet on Robin. Now I had to, if you have a board or maybe if you're an executive, you have a CEO, you have to get them bought in. In this case, everyone had seen Robin, and so they were very bought in. But you can see sometimes that somebody who hasn't done the job before, but has a very strong combination of intangible skills can go a long way. One of our values at Gainsight is beginner's mind, which obviously very, very popular in Japan, right? And that concept, we believe that sometimes a beginner can actually outperform an expert because they can come with a fresh perspective. And so that's an example where what I saw in her what were the intangibles that were what you need for that job. So that's an example that's worked well. So sometimes in that case, it wasn't somebody who had been in that organization moving up. In fact, we had other good people in that organization too. So we were very lucky with lots of choices. But in that situation, it was one where I was like, you know what? Robin has the intangibles to actually make that happen. So notice somebody's intangible skills, not just like they've done this job before, because otherwise you'll never bring new people into the equation. Number two is I would say encourage people moving laterally. In this case, it was a promotion, but we've had a number of situations where CSM becomes a product manager, a product manager becomes a salesperson becomes a CSM, right? We've had all those permutations, and encouraging that, like, in a company, it's not just about moving up to progress. Sometimes you can move across as well. And then the final thing I would say is, if you're CEO or leader, get to know the people that are 2 levels down from you, not just your direct reports. So your direct reports are great, but sometimes that next generation leader might not even report to you. So as an example, there's a woman named Megha, and Megha, M-E-G-H-A, and she is our head of strategy, and she was in like business operations at Gainsight, but I just ended up starting to work with her closely through, didn't work for me, and she's just amazing. And so I worked with her. I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna have you report to me directly, and take on this bigger job. So those are some examples. So get to know people 1 or 2 levels down, encourage cross job movement, and really don't just focus on the like tangible experience, but also the intangibles.
I'm curious on the second advice, like, encouraging people to move lateral. What are sort of the intentions behind that, or the sort of the positive you get out of that?
I think one thing is that you get non-linear, you have lateral thinking, where, let's say you are a CSM, customer success manager, you become a product manager. You have a very different point of view and very different mode of thinking than somebody who's only been a product manager their whole career. You know the customers really well. You know the pain the customers have. You may not know product management as well. You'll need to help train that person, but you're going to bring a different perspective. And by the way, another little thing that I've learned is leaders that work for you have to also be open to these people that don't come directly from that field. Not all leaders are. Some leaders want to hire only people that have done that job before. If you want to have a company that creates a lot of mobility, you need to have leaders that are open to nurturing and building people that haven't done that job before.
Makes total sense. Yeah, that definitely changes perspective and thinking. One theme or topic that I'd like to cover on is burnout. And you mentioned that you're not a great leader or a good leader when you're burnt out. And I'm curious if you've ever come close to being burnt out.
Yeah, it's funny because I don't think, work and personal life sometimes conspire together, right? So I actually have had in the last year, a lot of personal stuff I've dealt with, and that did drag me down personally, but actually work-wise, I always had a lot of energy. And I think that some of that's just, I'm lucky that I have a job that I love and a team that I love. But part of it's also how I manage my own energy. And so I do see some of my team members, including some of my direct reports, get burnt out. And I always encourage them to really not just take time off. I think that's a little bit too generic. I think it's like find things that energize you. I personally don't think that the thing that energizes people is always taking a vacation. I think could be one. For me, it's like working out, like exercising every day. And I wouldn't say do every single day, but at least probably 6 out of 7 days at least. Wow. And another one is walking a lot. Another one is sleeping on time, right? So these are things that for me are what energize me, but what energizes you and other people might be different. And also, by the way, for me, hanging out with my kids. And I'll use that one as the last one as an example. For me, like one of the things that's I really enjoy is being very present. And so being present with my kids. So on the weekends, I go onto my iPhone and I turn off email, so I'm not going to get any work emails. And also, by the way, I never, ever, even during the work week, have notifications on. So no notifications, no email. If somebody needed to reach me, they could certainly text me for sure. And I've got my laptop usually pretty close, but for me, presence with my kids is an example, and I'm consciously doing that. And I tell everyone, I'm like, use that time. Now, does that mean I have to catch up on Sunday night? For sure. I work on Sunday late, a couple hours of Sunday night or whatever. But, Friday night to Sunday afternoon, usually don't do any work. So it's finding those things, that refill your energy bucket. And it's not necessarily just taking vacation.
Interesting. And have you ever dealt with one of your direct reports, like getting close to burnout, and
oh yeah,
how do you manage it, or what do you advise to that person?
Well, I think it's the more senior you go, the more one of the principles we have for our leadership team is you have to manage your own balance. I need you to be able to figure that out. I can't manage your burnout. I can tell you have full permission, take the time off you want, be unavailable whenever you want, do what you want. We're a distributed work from home company. Like I'm never going to tell you can't do something, like never. So it's up to you to be mature enough to do it. But as you go further down, I think you have to help people, right? And I think that's giving them tips. It's modeling like what you do. I think that's the biggest one. Is modeling like, what are you doing as a leader? I tell people I shut my email off on Friday night to Sunday night. I every week in my weekly email, I talk about what I did over the weekend with my family, kids. And, I talk about this past Sunday night, I talked about exercising a lot. Like all the stuff we just talked about, I talk about internally, which makes people feel more normal. Maybe a more vulnerable example, I mentioned last year was very hard and personally, and I decided for about 6 months to really hardly travel at all for work. Like literally, I think I traveled 4 days or something, and 5 days. And I told everyone that. I said, you know what? I'm going to take some time from not traveling, and I'm just going to, work from home. And, all of you have permission to do that when you need to. We'll be here for you. And everyone was they were both kind to me, very kind and supportive, but also like, wow, this is amazing that you're doing this. I feel more permission to do it myself. People actually said that to me. They said, wow, this is really great. And then just like last week, somebody said, Nick, one of the things that's amazing about Gainsight is, we've normalized taking care of yourself. And so therefore I feel comfortable. But on the flip side, if you think about some companies, I was talking to somebody just the other day about this. It was so draconian. They were like literally, trying. Oh, somebody said their best friend was getting married, and their boss. So they were going to like Australia for the wedding, and their boss said, cancel your trip. We got work. And the person said, no, like my best friend's getting married. I'm a bridesmaid. And so the boss said, well, when's the wedding? Maybe you can dial in after the wedding and we can do a Zoom call. It's like, yeah, that's the opposite. That's a good way to burn your team out, is to do that. This person, by the way, she said when she heard that, she resigned right after the wedding. So yeah, so that's a thing not to do.
Oh man, that's a great insight. Sort of try to modeling after leaders who've actually overcome that, but also having high expectation for a senior team, right? That they should be able to manage that themselves, right? And so,
correct. Yeah, that's I think one of the challenges, by the way, not just senior team. I think one of the challenges is, if you think about it as a leader, we want to empower our teams to do their best work, to take care of themselves. We also don't want to coddle them. Like the truth is, in business, like most of it is up to you. Everyone, every person, right? How much you want to work versus not. Do you want to exercise or not? Do you want to sleep well or not? It's just up to you. Like, and so I think there is a careful balance. I think maybe as a society, we've veered a little too much to like, I'm going to do it for you versus I'm going to give you permission and I'm going to empower you. I'm going to show you what I'm doing. You do what you want to do. And I think that's a little bit, I've come to the realization, you can't like do everything for everyone. The only way to make it sustainable is for them to do it for themselves.
Man, that's great advice. I feel like I'm getting mentorship from you right now.
Oh,
and you set a purpose, which is to prove that we can win in business by being human first. And it's a wonderful a purpose. And I realize that a lot of the advice or the talks you give has a lot to do with being human and being a good person. I'm just curious like where is that comes from? Like, is it your upbringing or sort of something that happened along the way? Just curious where the roots are.
I don't know, to be totally candid with you. I mean, I have amazing parents and things like that, but it's not like we grew up around the dinner table talking about this. I think that it's more, if I had to guess, it's more like outside of work, my interests are very varied and weird. Obviously music, but also like I'm very much into science and like quantum physics and philosophy and stuff like that. Science fiction. And so I'm not this person who wakes up and says, oh my gosh, the most important thing in the world is SaaS sales. I love it. I love my job. I really do. It's not customer success isn't the most important thing in the world. But I did realize early on, in fact, it wasn't just me, it was all of us, that like we had this very values-driven company, and there was something very personal about the way we were running the company. And for all of us, it wasn't about necessarily what we were doing, it was about how we were doing it. And we realized that like a big thing we aspired to was the ability to have a job and be a human being at the same time and treat people like human beings. And a lot of companies didn't allow that or give people permission. And we, actually wasn't me, it was Allison Pickens, the person I mentioned before, our former COO. We were in an offsite and she said, it's almost like we're human first, like, human beings first. And then that was what turned into what we are, right? But just to give you an example of making that real, we had a executive at Gainsight, or not really exec, somebody, not exec, but an individual who came from another company. And this other company was known to be a really tough culture. And the person themselves had a reputation of being really tough. And so there was some hesitation about hiring them. But I'd done enough reference checks and we made a bet and we hired them. And they turned out to be amazing and an amazing human. And what that taught me was that every human has, goodness and humanity inside them. It's just that some cultures bring out the worst and some bring out the best, And so there was this belief that I've been passionate about, which is the greatest opportunity when you're a leader is it's not about what you do or what you sell or whatever. It's about creating an environment where people can be themselves and be their best, right? And they don't have to feel like they have to fake it. One of the biggest challenges is if we are in an environment where we have to pretend to be something we're not, we're never going to be at our best. We're never going to feel the best. We're never going to do the best. It's a privilege to be a leader because you can help people be their best by being themselves.
Awesome. So I'd like to go to ask about, being acquired by Vista.
Yeah.
And, it's amazing. It's amazing outcome, at least for your shareholders. And, I believe you had, a lot of choices, right? Or a couple of options, right? Like to stay on track and go public or partner with Vista. I'm curious, like, what was the thought process behind that and how you came to that?
Yeah, I think some businesses lend themselves well to going public, after being venture backed, and some don't. To me, one of the big things is, are you in a business that's more of a sprint or a marathon? So sprint, I mean like something that's just growing like super fast like this. And it's all about like right now, everything's happening, or one that you're building it over time. We were more the latter. Snowflake, Frank Slootman's company is the former, right? And so Snowflake made total sense to go public. It's an incredible success story, right? Our business was more like this gradual over time build. As we talked about, we had slowed down, but also just the transition to SaaS and customer success, it takes a while. And so we wanted a partner that can help through that journey. And I always say that, there's a famous fable about the tortoise and the hare. And the hare is bouncing along really fast and the tortoise is kind of going slow, but the tortoise has a lot of stamina and just keeps going. And we always thought of ourselves as the tortoise that's very durable and persistent, never going to win the short-term race, but probably win the long-term one, right? And so if you're in that world, sometimes private equity or other structures are a good stop. Doesn't mean you couldn't eventually go public. You definitely could. But it's a good stop if you want to just not be under that pressure of just every single quarter. So I don't think we would have been a good public company. We probably could have gone public because the 2021, everyone could go public. But it wouldn't have been good for our customers, for our employees. And I think sometimes when you have a business that's more like a tortoise and you try to act like a hare, it hurts everything and everyone. It hurts your teammates because they're doing unnatural things. It hurts your customers because they're being forced to buy sooner than they should, it hurts the investors long-term. So I think if you have a hare, a rabbit, you're going fast, great, go public, do everything. If you have a business, more kind of a steady business, don't force it till you're really ready.
Interesting. Great advice. So last two questions. So one is, what is Nick Mehta doing 10 years from now? And then the last one is, do you have any last messages or advice that you want to relate to the audience?
10 years from now, well, first of all, who knows? I just hope that I am still a human at that point and haven't been fully replaced by a robot. Although maybe we'll like fuse with AI and that'll be fine too. But I think 10 years from now, I do think that, joking aside,
Hmm.
It's never been a more exciting and scary and unpredictable time in humanity than right now.
Mm.
And so I do think 10 years from now, it's impossible to even understand what's going to happen, right? It's the world's going to change so much. That's what I know for sure.
Mm.
And I hope that we will manage it well as an economy and a society and species. I'm confident we will. We usually figure that out, but it's going to be really different. So I think that's the thing and it's exciting. As I alluded to, I'm a huge fan of science fiction, and it's like we're living in a science fiction novel right now. And as I joke to my friends, I just hope the novel ends well. It doesn't end. It's not like Terminator 2 or something. And then advice.
Yeah.
I think that like if I close out with something that, maybe ties it all together.
Yeah.
It's ironic because you're watching this, meeting and you're learning from somebody, potentially. But also, I'd encourage you to not overlearn. Like there might be some themes here that could apply to you. That's great. But also know that like each journey as a leader is your own. And the worst thing you can do is take the things that Frank Slootman does or much, much smaller way Nick Mehta does and try to like just do them exactly as is. You might say, hey, Nick said this thing and that really resonated with me, or Frank said this thing, and go do it. Great. But if I said something that's like, that works for Nick, it doesn't, maybe you're probably not going to be as much of a Swiftie as I am, right? So that's not necessarily the right approach. What's the right approach for you? Like to make that really tangible. If you want to be very human with your team and really be vulnerable, find the thing you're passionate about. It's not likely to be the same things I'm passionate about. Maybe you're do-it-yourself, you build things at home. Maybe you're an artist. I'm definitely not an artist, maybe you're somebody who is a championship skier, right? Bring that passion, bring that who you really are, and don't ever just copy somebody else. That's the thing that's surefire failure, is trying to be somebody that you're not.
Nick, it has been amazing. I've learned so much from this. Wonderful insights. I feel like we should do a part 2 someday.
I'm happy to. You asked great questions. Thanks for the research, and I really enjoyed it.
No, it was a lot of fun. Thanks for your time. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.